She is Elle Victoria, Heels and Clutch, author of All She Wants. In fact, the last time you were on the show, that book was on its way coming out. Entrepreneur, although we've never met in person, we've had a good online social media relationship. So that's the positive of social media through cars and different things. And the last time you were on, it was October of 2022, episode 144. I had to look that up because time flies fast. And so here we are. Welcome back to Hard Parking.
That time has definitely flown. I was going to ask you, when was the last time we spoke? It's gone by pretty quick. So thanks for having me back.
No, of course. I feel like we've been talking about this for like a year anyway. And so I'm trying to get my life right with the podcast, as I was kind of saying earlier, so that things like this don't happen. So thank you for being like, Jay, pick a date. Let's do it.
Here we are. Here we are. Yeah, we finally got it together. So better late than never.
So tell me a little bit about, All She Wants, not the book itself, because you kind of talked about it the last time it was kind of come out, but has that opened up any doors? And I know you're an entrepreneur and you do a lot of successful things, but has that opened up, other doors or other desires to write like a subsequent book, or how's that kind of gone for you? And I'll be honest, I haven't bought it or read it. I don't like to read, so it's not you. But if it's available in the audiobook, that'd be great.
The audiobook is coming. I've been working on that. So that will be coming. But to answer your question, like what pathways or what has come from the book, from writing the book, from releasing the book itself, I think it's definitely opened some pathways into some other areas that I've been working with people, some different women's group. I was out for a few different women's groups. I was working with a brand called The Power of Words. And it started as a clothing brand, but they're championing mental health is what they're really focused on. And with their clothing, they try to promote mental health with various, slogans, terms, how you can promote an idea, a concept, a feeling, and how that can not only impact you as the wearer, like this is what you're saying about something, and maybe that's how you feel, but you're sending that message to others, which I thought was a really neat play on saying something, sharing something without even verbally communicating with someone. But, because some of the things in the book about finding your inner voice and saying what you need to say, taking control of things for yourself, we were able to partner. And so I did, a few different events with them. And that was really rewarding. And some other women's groups for Mother's Day and some things for women who were trying to rebuild their lives after domestic violence and things like that. And so it allowed me to feel like I was sharing with an entirely different group of people than like our car community that you and I are a part of, but in a different way and kind of touch people in an entirely different circumstance, but to also show how there's strength in finding your own way, navigating your own path, which for me comes back to driving a lot. So it was just neat how that was all connected and tied together. So I say that's a big part of what the book has brought about. And then a lot of other conversations about things. A lot of conversations because the book is a lot of steamy, we'll call it, materials. So ended up in some other conversations or events and things like that, which I kind of stayed away from, but I'll leave that up to you guys to think about.
You gotta wait for the audio book. So that sounds fun. but no, that, I mean, that other opportunity, reaching out to the women, victims of, hardships, maybe abuse and whatnot. And I mean, it's outside of our normal car community, but it's kind of one of the things that I try to do with One Auto when we have our events. It's like, we can tell people, yeah, we like cars and we're in a car community, but we're also about other people in the community. We're not just people who stand around and talk about cars all the time.
Right.
And I think that's great. And I wish more people that do what we do would do stuff like that. And it's not a clout chase. We have people in the car community that obviously do these huge events. But, I always ask myself, what are you doing when you're not in front of the camera? Are you taking the opportunity to use your network and your reach to help make a difference, your influence to help make a difference out there? So, I mean, prayers and graces to you for doing those things, because that's who you are. I know that's who you are. It's not anything other than using your opportunities to reach other people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do try. And I think to your point that there's a lot of people that come into the space that contribute in a myriad of ways, but to have people, and I've met so many people, and I feel like I have this really awesome group, this circle that I found, and that's how they are as well. And I think that's why we've gravitated towards one another and the people who are there merely for show. You know what? Great. It brings more interest to the community and the culture, and they're still a part of it. Everybody has their role. And finding that tribe, I think, is vital for everybody. But to your point, like when you have people that want to give back and find ways how impactful that can be because of the reach that we have, and we do band together and do that. And so even recently with a lot of the fires and things here in Southern California, I was sharing and posting more about the fires than I was about anything automotive related. And so many of us, we did some things together. We did a drive with Haggerty. They allowed like a donation drive that they hosted at one of their locations, and we were able to get a ton of things, supplies for people who lost their businesses, their vehicle that they used to provide landscaping in, or getting some things out for some of the firefighters. And it was just a really neat thing to see the community all out there, and how much people showed up it like made a lot of us really emotional just to see how people showed up for the community, people that aren't a part of the car community necessarily.
Right.
So it was just really beautiful to see, like, we're all people, and yeah, we drive around in our cars, and we all have different makes, models, brands, types of vehicles that we might be into. But, at the end of the day, we're all people. We all go home to, something, a home, a person, a pet. We have loved ones, careers, fears, things that people are losing, simple things, and just to be brought back to that, like, how much it means. It was just a really neat thing to be a part of and to see.
See, like I said,
my tangents.
No, I don't call that a tangent at all. I mean, a tangent is and we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but the politicization of the disaster. I said on a previous episode, at this point, it doesn't matter how we got here. It's how do we get past this, get everybody as stabilized as possible. Then once we've had a chance to breathe, then let the finger pointing begin. Let the reactive measures happen so that we can maybe proactively stop this from happening again in a lot of other places. But for now, let's just focus on the people, because they're the ones that are sitting there without a house, or without this or without that.
Right, for sure. In the midst of everything, it's not useful to do that. And so, yeah, it's crazy to see. But I don't know, I think like there's an interesting aspect of the car community that a lot of that happens where we have, and I know we talked about this the last time, where you have such a wide array of people from different ethnicities, religions, career backgrounds, and we all have this common joy that we share in automobiles. And we don't talk about a lot of those other polarizing topics. We just come together in the thing that unifies us, and we just celebrate that. And so I feel like it was another way that the car community was able to embody just coming together. We're all here in Southern California. You know, we all know somebody who in some way was impacted by the fires, you know, in some sort of way. And we all got together. We didn't talk about all the other stuff and just said, hey, this is our common interest right now, is supporting these people. And the car community showed up big time. It was really cool to see.
Yeah. So speaking of the car community, I don't know, what was it, 2 or 3 months ago, there was a commercial that came out and we kind of teased about talking about it. And now that the dust has kind of settled a little bit, in fact, it's funny how things are so polarizing and people get so up in arms about anything. We could talk about cars, we could talk about religion, politics, no matter what it is. Mm-hmm. You know, the CEO murder of Brian Thompson by Luigi, right? Mm-hmm. Or allegedly Luigi. It was everything, and then it was nothing. And so the Jaguar campaign, the car commercial that everyone was losing their minds over. Now that the dust has kind of settled on that, kind of looking back on it, you know, where are you with that now? And for the listeners, it's not that we were all up in arms or talking about it or praising it. We just thought it was kind of a fun topic to talk about. And the time is, God, it feels like it was 4 months ago now, maybe.
It really feels like it was forever ago. I'm trying to remember what I even told you about that.
I don't know. That's why looking back on it. I thought I was watching a commercial for Target or something, honestly. I mean, it was kind of that artful, you know, to me.
It was, and then I was like, oh, wait,
there's this car commercial? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think if I'm looking back, they were, you know, it was all the pink graphics and all the things like that. And I thought the commercials were horrible. I remember that's what I told you. I said, the commercial's terrible.
It could
you
be.
have no idea what it's for. Like, what is this for?
Right.
What are they showing us? Nothing about it was appealing, besides that it had this colored band, you know, these monochromatic themes in each scene, in each window, but it wasn't something appealing to necessarily to look at. I mean, if their effect was getting our attention, then it was very effective in that way. But personally, I don't think it really evoked what they were trying to accomplish by getting people excited about the cars. Because I assume that's what they were trying to do, to get people excited about the cars. You know, or maybe it was just to get everybody talking. And if that was their goal, then mission accomplished for sure.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think my takeaway was, you know, from a later thing, because the commercial never showed us anything. But when we did see some of the prototypes, I thought those were interesting, and I was excited to see, you know, what actually came from the prototype. But in regards to those commercials, they were awful.
Yeah, they felt like they were trying to, maybe they were really late to that game where they're trying to force any given agenda, because I think that peaked maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And so now I would say that the American society as a whole was just kind of tired of, okay, just show us what you want to show us. Don't try to make us think about this other society or this other worldly view or I don't know what it is you're trying to do. Just show us what it is you want us to see. And I'm wondering in the first teaser commercials if they would have actually teased something about the car, not just the redesign of the logo. Because later on we saw the silhouettes, or we saw the cars, and I thought they were fake. They didn't look right. I totally thought someone was trolling on social media, right?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. It did not look real.
I go, there's no way that's a real car. Really? Really? But then when we saw the actual videos of them, I was like, oh, okay, this looks like something you and I may have seen during Monterey Car Week, maybe at the Quail or something.
Right.
Or Pebble.
Concept Lawn, for sure. Right.
Yeah. And they're kind of cool. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with them moving forward, but I wonder if someone lost their job behind that campaign. It was just kind of all over the place.
I think you are spot on with it was like really delayed. I think if they'd come out with that 4 years ago, they would have received far more positive response, because that's when a lot of other campaigns were out with, the alternative, like the contrarian type of vibe of, I'm not mainstream, I'm, rebellious, and I do all these other types of things. We saw a lot of music artists coming up. We saw a lot of people that were being promoted who were, against body type inclusion or, unique gender identity. All those types of things were being like promoted heavily a few years back.
Yep.
And now there's been a complete pendulum swing, it seems like, to the other direction, where people aren't buying into that anymore. And so what I felt like was the imagery that they used was outdated, like you said, instead of them just coming out and saying like, oh, just be different. Something that simple, like just or be unique, be yourself. Here's this new car that you don't have to fit in with everybody else. Just be comfortable being yourself. And I think that's what they were trying to do, but instead they put all these very they put a lot of imagery and people out there that weren't necessarily easily relatable to most people, is how I'd put
right.
that. And so now you've really shrunk your group, because if you're just trying to reach out to people that look like this really small group, well, that's not the idea that I think any of them were trying to achieve. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think they missed on that one.
My 2 cents.
The last car commercial that, and I'd said this on a previous episode, because I touched on it for, I don't know, like a minute. But I think the last car commercial, and you'll remember this, that, unless there's been another one, that basically throughout be different, don't follow the same pattern, was, remember when this was sometime between 2008, 2012, when Audi started debuting their DRLs, and they were different than the BMW ones. And I could be misremembering this commercial a little bit, but there was a person, they're like, this is where you're supposed to grow up. This is where you're supposed to go to school. This is the car you're supposed to drive.
Right.
And I think the wall drops down or something, and the guy's daydreaming, and all of a sudden he's driving an Audi, like an A4 and A6 with the really cool lights, right? And it was like, be different. Like, that worked.
Right.
That worked.
Because I think it was so extreme what they did. There's a difference between being like a hip rebel, and I think, trying to stir up that individual idea or a little bit of a rebellious tendency. And I think with right now, regardless of what people want to say, there's some very polarizing climates out there. And be it if you're really into electric vehicles, some people are way far on that side. And then you have some people who are big time into gas, bigger, off-roady, the total, antithesis of, the typical EV lover, right? And so just looking at it from an automotive standpoint, let alone what's happening socially, I think regardless of where you are, if you're pushing people too far to one side, sure, you might be finding your group, but I think that they've overlooked that everybody across the board feels like there's something that makes them them. And then there's some part that they don't want to feel like that, they are just like everyone else. And so finding that sweet spot, I think, obviously as a brand, you need to have your own identity. And that's the key part of creating a strong brand identity and having strong brand imagery. But if you're trying to revitalize your brand, the last thing you want to do is to like paint yourself in this corner. And that's the crazy part about that. At least that's what I think. And so I think that's what you were saying about the Audi commercials. Like it took some really, the basic person of like, okay, this is how you want to live your life, which, there's general ideas that we all share. There's commonality that we have about good and bad, right and wrong. But then, we like to spice it up a little bit. And I think that's what you were saying that they were doing with that Audi commercial, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, this is the American dream. Go to school, get married, have a white picket fence, 2 pets or 1 pet, 2.5 kids. This is what you're supposed to do, but you can be something different. Boom, Audi, right? But,
right. Spice it up a little bit.
Yeah. And then this isn't like you and I, we're not, because one of the obvious things about these campaigns is pushing what seemed like in LGBTQ, not necessarily just inclusion, but just that. And I think that we both probably have really good friends in that community. And I know from having friends on this show where they're like, look, man, I don't need to see it. I just want to be me and do what I want. I don't need the press. So,
right.
But hey, so what's coming out that excites you as far as cars go?
Wait, there's one thing I want to say about that before we move on, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
I think like, as far as like that idea, that campaigning and everything, right? With Subaru, they did a lot of campaigning because they felt like they had a very specific demographic that was buying their cars, and it worked for them. And so they went through, but they didn't do it in a way that alienated other people who would want to drive a car, find value in their vehicle. And so I think it's good to recognize, okay, maybe if there's a particular group that you think, your product resonates with, then by all means. But if you're doing it and you're alienating other people, that's what's messed up. So I think like Subaru did a really good job of understanding how to do that. And so I'd say, maybe Jaguar needs to take a page out of Subaru's book. So, yeah.
Okay, we'll stay there because that's an excellent example. I was recently talking with a future guest, and she's in the LGBTQ community, and she was asking me a little bit about the podcast because she's going to be helping me, not necessarily the podcast, but on the One Auto stuff. Mm-hmm. And she goes, and I learned this from industrial design when I went to college and failed out of it. But Jhae, who is your target audience? Who is your one person? What does he or she look like? 34-year-old, working here, doing this, doing that. Who is your idea? And I think that it's a very traditional approach, but it works, right? And I think that's exactly what Subaru did, because they didn't say you can only be this person or that person. You can be whoever you want, but we're going to show these people in this commercial doing things with a car. So you knew immediately it was a car. And it's funny though, too, because I had a Subaru rental when I went to Minnesota last year, and my wife had no idea, right? But we, when I got the Subaru, I kind of chuckled. It was an Outback. It was a nice car. I gave it a great review.
Right.
But I was like, figures I got a Subaru Outback. That's funny. And then when I told my cousin I had a Subaru, he started laughing, because we're all in those fun jokes. And when I was driving with my wife, she goes, "Oh, this car." She goes, "Why did you say that's interesting and laugh?" And I kind of told her, and she started laughing. She goes, "Oh, my coworker has one of these, and she's gay." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, no." So she kind of got it, but it's still a great car, and I know a ton of guys and girls that aren't gay that love the car, and I think it's a cool car too. So that was an excellent example. God, you're good at this.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Okay, so I just came from Barrett and looking at all the really cool cars, and you and I have talked about some of the cool cars very briefly just in social media the last couple of years. There's a lot of nice cars coming out. And what's coming out that's exciting to you? And you can pick whatever you want because, I know you're big with the Porsches and the Aston Martin specifically and a few of the other cars. So what's coming out that excites you?
I think there's a new M5 that's coming out. I think there's a new M5 sedan that's coming out, I want to say. And I remember it was like, if I remember correctly, I believe it was in the low to mid 700 horsepower. It's all-wheel drive. And I thought that would be pretty pretty badass.
I'm
And
sure.
so that I thought would be pretty cool to see, especially if they do a wagon on it. So a big fan of that car, so that I'd be excited to see. Um, I heard that there's a Corvette SUV coming out. And
What?
so, yeah, I think I'd seen something about that on Car and Driver, that there was a,
Okay, so that wasn't Motor One or one of those things, right?
no, it said that Corvette was coming out with a Corvette SUV, and it was going to be, um,
I'm gonna look that up while I'm talking to you.
I'm like, I hope I'm not saying something crazy. I could have sworn that's what I saw. So I don't remember much about
Oh
that, but I
wow.
thought that sounds really interesting to me. And I mean, obviously I can understand why they'd want to get into that sector because there's so many other performance SUVs that are out there. So I thought, I mean, while that sounds really crazy to me, like, I'm not a fan of using a model name across the board, like we've seen with the Mustang, the E
Mustang
version of the
Mach-E.
Mustang Mach-E. I'm like, that's not a Mustang. This is a crossover SUV. It's not a Mustang. Like, don't do that. So that really, really irked me. So to think that Debbie's doing that with an SUV and calling it a Corvette SUV, I'm like, it's just crazy to me. But would you find? Did you look it up?
Yeah, Car and Driver 2025 Chevrolet Corvette SUV. It looked like it's targeting between 60 and 80. And I mean, if you didn't know the Corvette existed, you wouldn't even think it was a Corvette, but looks like it shares. And this is
Like
an
styling,
illustration,
right?
so who knows, right? But there's a bunch of YouTube thumbnails that show a black one. It looks kind of cool, but I agree with you. I don't know. The Corvette people are going to lose their minds. And I know Ferrari has the SUV, right?
Okay.
Lamborghini has it, and people were losing their minds when those were coming out. Obviously, Porsche's been ahead of the game for decades. But yeah, I don't know. Porsche has a lineup of different models. It's just the Corvette in 4 or 5 different trims, which isn't the same thing. I kind of feel like they shouldn't do this. Maybe call it something else.
Right. Right. And it could, just introduce it from the Corvette family or something, but calling
Yep.
it a Corvette, I think that's a disaster. But I think it's a great idea because, I mean, you see what Lamborghini did with the Urus, bringing them into the table, and obviously
yeah.
Porsche bringing in their different high-end turbos and all that in the GTS. And so it totally makes sense because people are able to have, more of a performance-based vehicle, but still be able to pick up their kids from school. So I understand they want to be able to bring people in, but the moniker I feel like is just wrong. And if I remembered it, it did look kind of Corvette-like with the front headlights and the rear end. But yeah, so I remember wanting to see that, not necessarily like it was something that I want for myself. I still have my GLC 63, so I'm a
Nice.
performance SUV person as well. I love the car. I don't know at this point that I would get rid of it. So it's been great. What else? I'm trying to think. I think that was it. I know the Prelude was coming out, but I don't think that's until 26. So I was excited to
So
see
the
that.
Prelude, and you're not going to get this out of your head once I say it if you haven't heard it already. But when you look at the Prelude, the front end.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like an SF90's front end.
Okay.
Yep. So next time you see it, you're going to be like, ugh. And then next time you see an SF90, you're going to be like, you're never going to look at it the same. From the way they did the lights and kind of the hood.
That's a good thing because I remembered, now I'm going to do a comparison test because I remember thinking maybe it's that stripe. Maybe it's just the headlights that gave me a lot of that new, don't crucify me for this, that new Prius. The new Prius
100%.
Toyota light,
Yeah.
or like the new Corolla, like the headlights only, not the grill. that I thought, okay, but it definitely, hey, the new Prius, I think, looks really good, honestly.
It's a
They did
nice
a great
car.
job designing that car.
Yep.
The aesthetics on it, the front end, like, it looks fantastic. But now I'm going to have to look up the SF90 and kind of see, do a side-by-side comparison. But no, I was just excited from, the nostalgia of, like, the Prelude. That was, like, a huge car when I was still in high school, and, that was a cool car to have a Honda Prelude. So to see that coming back, I was excited to see, like, okay, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to honor it? Is it still going to have the good styling to it? How they're going to perform? I know back then it wasn't some killer sports car, but it still was something that people wanted. It was a great introduction into sports cars and all of that. And so I hope that continues with the revival.
I don't know. They dropped the numbers for it, not the performance numbers, but just kind of what it comes with a few weeks ago. And I had a listener ask me, would I take to compare a Prelude with like an Integra Type S? And I said, dude, you can't do that because I want to say the Integra might be like 330 horsepower or something. Right. And I think the Prelude is being introduced at like 189 or 200 horsepower.
It's
so
unless
close. They make a Type R version, right? I'm like, dude, what are you asking me, man? You should know better. He's a car guy, a Honda car guy too.
Right.
But
and
we'll see when it comes out.
Yeah, so that was something I was excited to see. And like, that Acura Integra Type S, like, that car's great. So I'm hoping that they can, obviously it didn't look the way we thought it was going to look, but it's a great car.
Right.
Like, it's a phenomenal car. But so in that theme, I'd like to see what they do with it. So that's exciting. But otherwise, I think, I don't know. There's been so many electric cars that have been coming out. It's just kind of taken that excitement away for me. I know they're going to be doing that 718, the Porsche 718 Boxster and a Cayman in an electric version. And so, of course, I'm very curious about what that's going to be. I have a 718 Spider, so I'm interested in to see what happens in that space. From personal reasons, but just also understanding, like, how that might affect the ownership and things like that. Who knows now with all the changes in electric mandates and things like that we're seeing here in the U.S. But I'm curious what it's actually going to look like. I'm sure the performance is going to be crazy. So if there's anything I'd say that I'm most excited to see, it's going to be that.
So it sounds like you're kind of a potential fan, just knowing that that's the writing on the wall. I want to move to a handful of questions. I went to like a supercar panel that had Jim Miller, which I met. You probably know him. Peter Brock was there. Amy Shackelford was representing. One of the main designer or engineer for Hennessy. I would have had their names down, but I forgot. And then the guy from Ford who designed the the 05 or whatever Ford GT and the most recent one. And it was pretty interesting discussion. So I stole some of the questions and I loosely reinvented some of them. But since you talked about this, the upcoming potential of the EV Porsche, I think I know what your mindset might be of the EV movement and the projection for the future, but kind of where are you with that? Did it take a while to adopt? Are you just all about innovation, or kind of where are you with the entire EV movement?
Oh, I'm not a fan of EVs. So
I didn't think so based on the last conversation, but it sounded like you're pretty excited about that Porsche.
Well, no, I'm just, it's more of a curiosity of like what it's going to do. Cause my 718 Spider, I'm keeping, it's a manual. It's, it's a flat six. That's not going anywhere. And I'm not necessarily a fan or a believer in EVs that way. I'm a fan of hybrids. I think hybrids are fantastic. Yep. And so that's where I stand, that this idea of EVs being sustainable or better for the environment and just all of that and that whole cycle, that the math just doesn't math there for me. And so I can see other spaces that aren't really party to this conversation. We'll just keep it about cars and that experience. But I'm not an EV fan. So as far as what's been happening in the vehicle space, and I think that might be why I'm not as excited about what's coming, is because how do you take like Dodge? How do you take a Charger and try to electrify that? Like, not only was it their customer base, it just not what those people wanted. So like being force fed something, and just how it changes your experience of driving and everything else. So I'm not a fan of it, but your question about EVs, what were you going to ask before I went down that rabbit hole?
Now, that Charger, I saw it at Barrett, and I think it's a good looking car. At least it still looks like a muscle car, even though it's
right.
electric.
I agree with that.
It looks good at least, but you'd have to trick the driver into thinking they were doing something they weren't doing, which isn't unlike most of our normal cars now, but there's still a difference. And I agree. I think that more efficient hybrids is the way to go. And I'm wondering, for all these companies that are going all in on full electrification, like Honda, Stellantis, some of these other ones, I wonder what, I don't know what the future really holds, because America, for one, is way behind the grid capacity to even handle it.
Okay.
And once you get to that point, at some point, the cars are going to have to hit a proverbial wall with the availability of the energy needed. And we can see right now, without it even happening, it's imminent.
Right.
So I think we need to focus on one thing before we speed too far ahead on the other.
Right. Yeah, for sure. In here in Southern California, you live somewhere too, where we're constantly, be it heat, and where we're using our air conditioning, and they try to have cycles. It's just not. And then with the fires here and all the stuff that was happening related to that, it's a crazy thing to think of. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. But as far as the auto manufacturers and things like that, I think they were all, leaning into it because they didn't have an alternative. They were being told they had to. And so, yes, right. There's other things that manufacturers are doing to require people to continue to reinvest with them, which we've seen with like paid subscription services and things like that. I do know with EVs that, those life cycles on the cars, they're not that long, or the batteries are crazy, and the replacement cost of those, and so if you have people now, if they need to, most people need transportation, they have to go back and reinvest with the automaker, at a heavier cost if they have an EV vehicle. And so I can understand from that standpoint if that's a part of the motivating factor for them. But as we can see, brands that have really leaned into it have had some dire, sales in response to it. Like Mercedes tried to push really hard, and then they got stuck with all these electric cars because the demand isn't there. People don't want them. People are living with the repercussions of having a fully electric vehicle. If you live in cold weather, how that affects them when, charging and stuff happens. There's a lot of people that live in high density housing, and they don't have their own personal chargers because everybody doesn't have a garage at home where they can put it in. And so there's just so many aspects to that. The time that's required for charging, depending on the different stations that are there. And so it just was something that was forced on people before any of the supporting elements were really in place, number one. But the other half of that, like I said, for me is the full cycle, the full life cycle of creating the batteries and disposing to the end. from creation to disposal, and everything tied to that. It just doesn't add up to me from a environmental space. And then when you get into the cost aspect of, well, sure, you don't have any, maybe your cost of operating is reduced because you don't have all the mechanical parts and things like that. And you're not having to buy gas maybe at certain things. But once the clock, is up on that vehicle, good luck. Good luck with replacing that battery or whatever else. So it's just transferring it or delaying the cost, and if you get out of the car after a year or something, but now you're in that perpetual cycle of having to buy a vehicle, repeatedly. And is that really sustainable for everybody? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the lack of standardization in the whole life cycle, it's like they just keep kicking the can down the road instead of trying to come up with a resolution to convince people. I think they're trying to figure it out, but again, nothing's the same across brands, across components, with the exception of some very rare, I guess, materials that are being mined, and that's a whole other topic. But that's my fear. I mean, I have a hybrid. Obviously, I don't have a full EV, but even my NSX, I don't know what the future holds with it. And I love the car,
right,
but I don't see myself keeping it past, my purchase term because I don't know what's going to happen. And they've already started discontinuing parts for a car that's a hybrid. It was made in 2017. We're not even 10 years into the car's life cycle. And there's things that have nothing to do with the electronics that have been discontinued. So
which is crazy to me. Yeah. And I'm like, what?
It's
to hear
nutty.
you even say that is just like, it's heartbreaking. Like, I love that. I love your car. And to think
I love my car too.
They're going to allow that, to happen. It just goes to show like what a money grab to me it seems to be, because they're not, to your point, they're going to get the money now and kick the can down the road to figure out what comes in the future. Like, yeah, give us the money now. We'll figure that out later. Selling people on this idea that this is the way to go. When we have something that's working, when we have some incredible emission standards, like here in California, like we have very strict emission rules here. And if that were employed other places, we'd see a big difference. The U.S. is not the biggest pollutant, air pollutant. It's not us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to point fingers, but it's not the United States. And so we're trying to create something to solve problems that need to be solved at the source. And we can do our part here and continue to make things better, which we've been doing. But this whole EV push, it's not solving that problem. That problem is still going on, and we're actually creating other problems. And so that's crazy to me. But with the hybrids, like, to see the things that they've done and how phenomenal, like the fuel economy or the efficiency that you get out of hybrids, it's crazy. It's really, really crazy. And they're great vehicles, like the Highlander, like the new Highlander is great looking.
Oh, so nice.
Right? I think it's a great looking car, and it's definitely, you get anything you would want, and in a nice Toyota product too, reliable and not crazy expensive or anything. And so to think of people going to other places, it's crazy. Or if you're more into luxury stuff, I know the S-Class hybrid is really, really a great vehicle too. And you still get everything that you want, all the luxury things that you would be looking for. And so to be able to get it in something like that, I think that's a great alternative. That, what's it, the S580E, I think is the model.
I believe so.
And to have something like that, I mean, yeah, I will promote a hybrid any day, but EVs, yeah, they're not going to get any love for me, generally. Now, obviously, there's some that are really cool. They have really cool features, right. And,
sure.
There's some things like that I think it's great, but, I don't know. I'm a component of a high efficiency manual vehicle. It gets people driving safer because they're not texting on their phones. They've got to be engaged and pay attention. It gets people involved in the activity of driving again. And maybe that segues to a whole nother thing about self-driving cars. And I think you can probably guess how I feel about that then. But
that is an excellent segue. Because I was going to ask you if you've ever driven in a Waymo or ridden in a Waymo. I haven't, but I know that California has them all over the place, just like we have. And apparently they're really cool. But I think for people like us, which represent a very small percentage of drivers, I don't know what the percentage of, let's just throw a number out there, 3%, right? Everybody else just wants to get to where they're going. And like my wife used to want a Tesla. And I borrowed one for a weekend from a friend. And she goes, I just want to see the self-driving part. And I go, well, Yvette, it doesn't really work like that. You still have to be paying attention. You have to touch the wheel or things going to start skitzing out on you. She goes, what? You mean you have to still pay attention? I go, yes. She goes, well, I don't want one anymore. I go, well, because she thought that she could just go to work and take phone calls and be on her laptop and do spreadsheets until she got to where she was going. Right. And I think that probably represents a lot of people who are, they're transportation people. They're not necessarily car people and don't want that experience. Right. And so I think that's what we're kind of battling against with all these Waymos and I guess they're just automated taxis at this point.
Right.
But
for sure.
I guess we're going to be sharing the road with them at some point in the next 10 years. Like, I wonder what that percentage is going to be.
Yeah, it's a scary thing. I mean, you're starting to see more pushback on them. And, I'm sure you've seen the things where they were like in a parking lot in San Francisco and they're honking and going crazy. So there's like noise nuisance or people getting stuck in them. I just saw on
that was the drones. That was those crazy drones that we don't ever hear about anymore all over the United States.
Oh gosh. No, not just that. Yeah, that's crazy too. No, but it was a parking lot of Waymos. And they were all in this parking lot in San Francisco in like a storage lot that they have them in. And the lights, it was just like, I don't know if they were hacked or what was happening, but they were going crazy. I just saw on Instagram just this last week, a cop pulled over a Waymo and it drove on the wrong side of incoming traffic because there was like some construction in an area and it got confused. And, luckily the cop was there and saw it happen, but the vehicle was just continuing on its way on a very busy, I think it was like a 3-lane divided highway down the wrong side of the street. And so I think, obviously people will say, well, there's it's a bug or, it was a glitch or, it's something in the software, reprogramming things that is an error, things that need to be fixed. But
still,
but that shows like the glaring danger of having something that's fully automated like that in any capacity, be it driverless or somebody who's just in the vehicle and it's self-driving. Like that's a whole different danger, in my opinion, with hacking and backdoor pathways and things like that. That I think is there's a difference between the nuisance and then the safety and then the vulnerability that you have, or where you have something like that in your car could potentially be fully remotely controlled. I would never be okay with putting myself in that situation or my loved ones. And to think that I could be out interacting on the road with something that potentially can either have a software problem or, be remotely controlled. I'm like, have any of you people seen like Eagle Eye or
yeah, nice callback. The movie's awesome.
Right? But it's crazy because all that stuff is real. It's true. It can happen. But as far as just enjoying the vehicle or being in that percentage of drivers, like back to what you were saying, obviously here in Southern California where you are, there's a difference with car culture and stuff like that. Here in, outside of LA, your car is a part of your identity. It's a part of who you are. And so there's an interesting aspect that we have here. And I think in some other metro places, I think like in the Miami area and in Florida, you see a lot of that there too. But places where it's easy to rely on alternative public transport, like in New York and places like that, where people don't really have cars as much, or it's not required to as much. I can see where, maybe people who are more accustomed to that type of lifestyle, where as long as you have transportation, that works. And I can see that would grow in places, and not having the financial commitment of having, to maintain a car, to buy a car, have insurance, all that stuff. I get that. I don't know, but as far as, I think that's another group of people, and depending if people live in metro areas, that makes sense. But outside of metro areas, I don't really see how it's sustainable to think that that's going to work. And, we see it in the big metro areas where it's really densely populated, and people might not be traveling for really long distances. But once you get out of, and LA is a big place, Greater Los Angeles is huge. And so it's easily 45 minutes on a good day to cover some ground. So trying to see that be something sustainable outside of that, I don't think can really happen as far as like the Waymo thing or the self-driving thing. I think it's beneficial when people are commuting. And I think with rail systems and things like that, could alleviate that for a lot of people, but I could see some of the self-driving cars becoming a bigger thing for sure. I think that's inevitable to a point if people are having to commute, like we're seeing more and more of, just because of cost of living, people having to live farther away. But that also might be dependent on how, people are able to work remotely.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. So you're not a fan of them, obviously, but you can definitely understand how we can get to that point. And I was just kind of imagining as you were talking about it, it's almost as if you were reading my mind, which is kind of scary because it's not the first time in this conversation that you've been reading my mind. But I was thinking this last year, we took a trip to Barcelona and then also to Portugal. And one of the observations that I had, because we had this stupid little Fiat 300 hybrid that was perfect in the dense little towns and cities, but was absolute garbage when I had to drive on the toll road from point A to point B. And one of the observations that I had was when I was in town, I saw a lot of the little smart cars, because they still make them over there. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they seem to have made sense. Sure, they're not fully automated, but there was a lot more really compact, tiny EVs in the densely populated metro area. In fact, I think it was, I don't know if it's Peugeot. I don't know, I talked about it before, but they make, one of those little companies make this tiny car that I instantly fell in love with. Mm-hmm. And I saw it 3 or 4 times, and at least 2 of those times was working at an airport. You know how you just stare out the window at all the little carts and stuff that's going out by the planes? Mm-hmm. And the other 2 times, it was in a dense area. When I looked it up, it's designed to be kind of like a delivery vehicle for packages or couriers or something. And it's EV, but it's not fully automated. But I could see automation doing those type of tasks, but only in a densely populated area, because you're right. I think that's the only place it'd ever make any sense.
I mean, and I don't know, I was thinking about, because it's kind of like toggling between the EVs and self-driving, but like that VW ID Buzz, I was able to spend a little time with that. And so it's like, okay, well, here's something that's electric, but it's not really small. It's not one of those compact vehicles. And does that make sense? Because, if we're driving long distances, we're looking at range, we're looking at, is it comfortable? Do you want to be squeezed into something that small for that long? But the ID Buzz it's a lot of room. It's super spacious, had some really neat features of, moving things around for if you obviously wanted to haul things and stuff like that. Now you're getting into your range. I'm not sure if that had a self-driving feature to it, but it made me think about, like you said, being in the small town and moving and navigating around in space like that. But then if you're trying to go somewhere farther, what that looks like, how that works. And I think that's the bridge and connector that hasn't really been sorted out, because the people who really want to utilize the self-driving features are people that are traveling long distances. And that's harder to do in electric vehicles, with maintaining your range and worrying about charging and stuff like that. And so I feel like that's the conundrum that they face in that space with, okay, we want people to be able to say, hey, you can self-drive and get to and from work, even if it's, in an improved state where you don't have to be as involved. Because we've all seen the people in Tesla falling asleep, or asleep behind the wheel. But let's say even if it's something that has progressed and it is better and you don't have to be as engaged, is it capable of getting you there and back without taking a lot of time? And then, is it something that's going to be comfortable or something that you can still use regularly in your life? If it's spacious enough, can you stop at the grocery store on the way home? Because these are the things that people are looking at in their daily lives. It's not just to work and straight back home and then any other errands you have to do. That's not realistic. So I don't know that. And then that other thing I think looks pretty cool is that Honda Prologue, I think it was.
The Prologue, yeah.
That looks cool. I haven't spent any time with it, but I'm not sure if does that have any self-driving features with it being full EV?
I would imagine that it does. That bus that you had, probably the ID bus, probably does too, because that technology, I know the non-EV Hondas have it now. That I think Tesla was like one of the first to have it, and then Honda has it. I think Cadillac has it. But what I know about the Prologue, because I would love to drive one, is they're incredibly heavy, and they go through tires because of that. Yeah, they're all heavy. But I thought about, I'm like, maybe I would get it. And I'm not anti-EV. It just has to make sense for me. And, I was kind of looking into maybe I should get a Prologue for a minute. And I go, that's I don't know how often I would use it. That'd be cool to have one for like a week just to kind of play around with it, kind of like you in the Volkswagen bus type of deal. But it's funny that I don't think about the cars as much as I think about the utilitarian vehicles like an SUV. There's a lot of EV SUVs I think are pretty cool. Hell, I was looking at used Hummers for a second just to see what those would be like. But I don't want to pay that kind of money for something I'm not all in on.
Right. They are pricey. They are cool looking.
I would imagine they have some sort of a self-driving function. I don't think it's fully like a Tesla would, but it's just like the more advanced version of adaptive cruise control where you can kind of sense and do its own thing. But I mean, that'd be convenient for road trips, to your point. So do you have any plans on going to Monterey this year?
I never have plans, but I usually end up there. So
Fair.
We'll see what happens. So it's a time of year when it's probably, I most likely won't be this year. Just my youngest daughter plays collegiate soccer, and this will be
cool.
her last year, and so I try to go to all her games. So we'll see. But generally, I usually end up there. And so, what were you going to ask me about going?
Just curious if you're going. That's all. I don't know if I'm going. I never know if I'm going as well. I usually don't know until 3 weeks beforehand. Rare is the time where I've actually planned. I think twice I've made hotel reservations in January. That's when you should do it. But one of the times they moved the week back. And so I had to cancel those reservations. And of course, when you rebook them, they're 4 times as much, which is really crappy.
It totally changes.
And I think the other time was during COVID. So everything got canceled.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's the last time otherwise I ended up, planning maybe a month or so ahead. One time I think I ended up deciding like the week before to go. So not usually the best, most cost efficient way to do it. I'll tell you that.
Nope.
But yeah, so. And then I just started alternating. When you go as long as we've been going, I know you've been going for a long time too. I've been excited about alternating, unless there was something I was really needing to go and see. And to circle back to what you asked me about, what was I really excited about? Yeah, I don't know that I need to go to Monterey to see it. So we'll see what happens unless something else surprising comes out. Yeah. So I think that's it. Yeah.
we didn't get to everything, but the conversations didn't really flow that way, but that just saves us something for next time.
Yes, it
does. I'm glad to have you back, and let's do this again. Maybe even if there's something to preview for Monterey, or if there's any really cool news coming out and you want to share it, we'd all love to hear your lovely voice and make sure that we are continuously following you on social medias and various channels.
Thank you. I love it. And yeah, I'm revisiting YouTube again. So if anybody wants to check out my YouTube, I just posted a new video with a pretty neat a brand new 68 Mustang fastback, which how is it brand new? It's a 68, but yeah, so I'm going to start revisiting YouTube and putting some more stuff out there. So if you guys will check me out there, I'll appreciate that. Subscribe, please. And yeah, for sure, we have plenty of other things to talk about. And who knows, I might be undertaking an off-roading project for one of the vehicles in the garage. Maybe we can talk about that too.
Wow. Sounds good. Sounds good. I'll make sure I put all the creds in the notes of this episode. And again, appreciate you spending the time, and I will talk to you later.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you. All righty.
Hard Parking Podcast, a little bit of cars, and so much more, available anywhere you get your podcast, or check it out at hardparkingpod.com.